Hey, we got one more interview. Like I said, Nick Roush, he always delivers. He's going to be down there traveling all the way to Gainesville to take in this game. We've got Zach picking the Gators. Let's see what old Nick's got for us. Will he pick Kentucky? Find out right here. All right, we're pleased to be joined by one of our favorites, Nick Roush, Kentucky Sports Radio. You know him as the host of the 11 Personnel podcast with Adam Luckett, one of the best podcasts out there. Nick, thanks for joining us once again.
I'm happy to be here on that SEC podcast and excited for this weekend, man. We knew it was going to be a big one, and Florida really amplified the stakes with a big win over Utah. So they're the flavor of the month, and I think Kentucky likes that. I think Kentucky loves having all of the Florida hype going into this week. They excel with the chip on their shoulder, and they got it. They got it.
Yeah. All right. So I'm going to ask you all about that. But before we get to that, I wanted to get your thoughts on the opener against Miami. Personally, I thought Kentucky started a little slow, just completely dominated the second half like you'd expect a ranked team to do against Miami. What was your main takeaways from the ball game?
It was there was a lot of similarities in many Mark Stoops opening games, except the one difference is the Cats covered. They hit their team total over, right? It's Stoops likes to keep things vanilla, especially ahead of a big game like this versus Florida. They didn't do a ton of creative things on offense, but we did get to see a little bit of what's to come. And I think the biggest takeaway I've got is that you are going to see whereas it used to be maybe 60-40 run, closer to 50-50 last year. It's probably going to be more like 60-40 pass, particularly without Chris Rodriguez in the fold. We don't have any news one way or the other, but they're preparing to play without him. And now that that's the case, go out there, Will Levis, go win yourself a football game. He had 300 yards, 3 touchdowns in the opener, and they're going to need a lot of that and maybe then some down in the swamp this weekend.
Well, I'm glad you hit on that because I wanted to ask you, do you think it's at all possible they went into that ball game saying, "Hey, we know we can beat Miami of Ohio. We have got to get these receivers, Barry Brown, Dane Key, and even Tavian Robinson, he's not a young guy, I get it, but he's new to the team. We have got to build this chemistry because we don't have much time before SEC play." Do you think there's anything to that?
Oh, there certainly is, and we got that. You saw late in the second half, even though the game was effectively over, Kentucky's still throwing the ball. Those guys need reps. That was when Brown got his longest reception of the day. So when Key got his first touchdown, you want to build confidence in those early games, and I certainly think we got that, and you got it in a lot of young guys too. It wasn't just the receivers. Deion Walker from Detroit, he's a big 6'7", 340-pound guy who can play defensive tackle. He's not just a nose. He went and got 4 tackles, and we talked to him this week, and he's like, I learned that if I get north, nobody can stop me. So you have confidence from those guys. Keaton Wade had a big stop on third down. I don't think they'll need him as much at outside linebacker, thanks to some late breaking news. But also Alex Afari, he played 43 snaps at nickel, position they typically aren't eagerly rolling it. Like they want an experienced guy who can play smart, and he played well. He was second on the team in tackles, had a sack, tackle for a loss. So the future is bright with a lot of talented freshmen on this roster.
So you hinted at it there, Jordan Wright. That's the big news. Eligible to play, returning to the field. How big of a boost is this for the Kentucky defense going into this Florida game?
It's huge. It's huge. And, even if he doesn't go out and get a bunch of sacks, right throughout his career has been a havoc maker. I think he only has 7.5 sacks, but he's really sprayed the ball elsewhere. He's got 2 defensive touchdowns in his career, a bunch of forced fumbles. He picked off a pass last year against Mississippi State. And it really opens up the playbook for Brad White. Last week, they played a lot of nickel. You're going to go back to more 3-4 because you've got 2 experienced outside linebackers. He's a super senior team captain. You need that stout presence when you're going up against a guy like Anthony Richardson. Those are the contained guys, the outside linebackers. Florida ran for 283 yards last week. You need big bodies in there. And the one thing we definitely didn't see in week one is some of those the creeper blitzes, right? Where you're bringing an outside linebacker, you're dropping a defensive lineman in coverage to try to confuse the quarterback. Brad White can really take off the gloves this week and do a lot of stuff that just Florida hasn't seen on tape.
Now, I know you wrote about this at the Kentucky Sports Radio. Go check it out if you haven't already. But Roman Harper with some interesting comments here on this Florida Kentucky matchup. He's picking Florida big, called Kentucky soft. When in the hell has Mark Stoops' football team ever been defined as soft? That's totally inaccurate. Well, if we had Roman Harper on this call right now, Nick, what would you say to him?
I would say, Roman, thank you. Thank you so much because that's exactly what this Kentucky football team needed to hear. Mark Stoops even admitted after the game that, sometimes you don't know if they're taking a business like approach or they're going through the motions. And at times they were going through the motions. Thanks to your kind comments, Roman, I don't think that's going to be the case on Saturday. They've reshuffled that offensive line. They've got Kenneth Horsey kicked out the offensive tackle. And while he's inexperienced there, they're putting their best five on the field. They know who their best blockers are going to be. They're going to be all on the field at once. Lavelle Wright is healthier than he was a week ago. And even though you don't have Chris Rodriguez or Ramon Jefferson, you're going to see a much different looking Kentucky offense this Saturday in the Swamp.
Well, you referenced that offensive line gave up 4 sacks against Miami of Ohio. A lot of those in third down passing situations. What's the level of concern that that's going to be an issue against Florida, which they did not get a sack in that Utah game?
My concern is less about the pass protection because Kentucky really wanted to test David Wallaball to see if he could do it. I don't think he passed that test, so they've changed up things. But they're also going to have tight ends help in protection, right? They're going to slide things a different way. Schematically, I think they'll be helped in pass protection. Where I'm more concerned about is in the running game. If you even if you take out the negative sack yards, they only had 75 yards and 3 yards of carry there. Like that's not the Kentucky rushing attack we're accustomed to. And where it really hurts him, Mike, is that it's in the play action game. In the second half, the Miami guys that were crashing down on Will Levis because they didn't have to respect the run. This Kentucky offensive line needs to help bust a few big plays early on just to make the Florida defense respect that vital play action passing portion of their offense.
Now, on the latest edition of the 11 Personnel podcast, if you haven't checked it out, go check it out. I thought you made an excellent point, Nick, about red zone in this game. Anthony Richardson was just a monster in the red zone for Utah. Kentucky, obviously, at this point in time, without Chris Rodriguez, they're hammered down there in the red zone. Do you think Florida has an edge in the red zone in this matchup?
I do, and because Richardson, I mean, just tackling that guy is hard enough, right? And when you get inside the 20s, the condensed field, there's not as much space to work with. You need a guy that can move the pile. And frankly, the best person to move the pile for Kentucky right now is Will Levis. In 4 first half opportunities, granted, one of those was into half that you're kind of running out of time sort of aspect. But they settled for 2 field goals, and one of those drives ended with a 4th down interception in the end zone. Kentucky has to be effective, capitalize on scoring opportunities. In the 2 wins against Florida, Kentucky really bowed up in the red zone. In the last trip, Dan Mullen punted on the Kentucky 37. They forced field goals. Florida missed field goals in certain situations. So this is huge. This is huge. That's where your money's made. As much as we're going to break down this game, a lot of it's going to come down to who takes care of the ball best and who can capitalize on scoring opportunities.
What's your confidence level that Will Levis has a better game than Anthony Richardson in this Saturday?
It's actually pretty high. And I know that might sound crazy going into this, the way that Richardson played last week, but Will Levis had his worst game of the year against Florida last year. And I think he remembers that all too well. And then you factor in Richardson, like as great as he was, he can't always be that great, right? Like I'm not saying it's a guarantee that he's going to regress, but both of these guys have had turnover problems throughout their careers. Richardson was clean. He played almost a perfect game. I find it hard to believe that he can play a perfect game against top 25 teams in back-to-back weeks, particularly against a very experienced Kentucky defense with a lot of seniors playing inside linebackers. All he has to do is make 1 or 2 mistakes, and that can cost the Gators the game.
So if Kentucky wins on Saturday, what's the path for that to happen?
I think it comes down to Will Levis not only throwing the ball well, but being effective in the running game. We didn't see any of that design Q run. I think we're going to see some of that this week. And here's something that it gets talked about a lot at Kentucky because they love their tight ends. But I think tight end usage is going to be important because you saw Florida's linebackers wear down throughout the game. They're not very deep there. If you can get those tight ends running routes, it only takes a couple of mess ups by some of those linebackers to create big plays. So I think you need to have a solid quality performance from the tight ends and for Will Levis to really be the player that the Wildcats expect him to be in 2022.
How huge does this game loom for Kentucky, just the overall season? You don't want to put too much stock in one game, but
Right.
if you really have visions of getting to Atlanta, to me, it seems very difficult. You drop this game, you're going to get there. What do you say?
Well, the good news is like a big picture, we're all prisoners of the moment, but Kentucky's big three home games, they go to Tennessee, Florida, and Ole Miss. If you win 2 out of 3 of those, you're still in position to do what you want to be able to do at the end of the season. So it's not life and death. However, you play an FCS team next week, then G5, and then you go on the road to Ole Miss. It might take some of that air out before you get another home game against South Carolina. So in Kentucky's 2 10-win seasons, they both included wins over Florida. And for you to get that momentum going, for you to get those dreams big and dreams to be as big as you want of playing in Atlanta, this week gives you a little bit more wiggle room before you go on the road at Ole Miss and at Tennessee. So while it isn't the worst case scenario if Kentucky loses, it can do so much for your program. You can watch and you'll be a top 10 team at that Ole Miss game. So it can do so much for you, getting momentum going in the right direction for the Wildcats. And Mark Stoops would pass Bear Bryant with the most wins as a Kentucky head coach. Like it shouldn't be an asterisk, but it kind of is in a matchup that means a ton for this Kentucky football program.
All right, final question, Nick. Moment of truth. Who you got winning the ball game?
Once the dust settled and I watched them that Florida Utah game, I was ready to say, without Chris Rodriguez, Kentucky can't do it. Jordan Wright's back. I really believe in this UK defense. While they may not have a ton of first-round NFL draft picks next year, they have JJ Weaver can be that dude. He's played big in this game. This game means a lot to him. He tore his ACL playing against Kyle Pitts the last time down there. I think this Kentucky defense does bow up, play well against the run, force Anthony Richardson to make some difficult throws. And I think that ultimately they can keep it a low-scoring affair and come away with a 27-24 victory.
Ooh, I like it. All right, Nick, before you go, tell the audience where's the best place to find all your work.
You mentioned 11 personnel before. If you want to hear more about that breakdown, we did it's as thorough breakdown as you'll find. Go check us out there. More KentuckySportsRadio.com, the Kentucky Sports Radio YouTube channel. I've also got a morning radio show from 7 to 9. You can find all those links at my Twitter feed at Roush KSR.
Okay, brother. Hey, we're 2 for 2 with the Homer picks. I love it. Yeah, I love it when we got different guests saying different things, different winners here. And I that's just a tease for our picks upcoming, but can't wait for it.
I love it, man. A bunch of homers just talking college football, right?
Mm-hmm.
On cloud 9. No, that was